Okay, we are underway. Thank you for joining us for another Parlor Car Chat episode. This is a program of the San Luis Obispo Railroad Museum, these Parlor Car Chats, and we're looking at the screen at the front page or home page of the website, which, among other things, highlights what's going on at the museum, including the Parlor Car Chats there on the left. But I'm also showing you this to make it clear that there are opportunities for donating to the museum, even in its state of shutdownness. Basically, the museum has had no income for a year plus now because of the shutdown. So if you want to help keep Parlor Car Chats going, and specifically, and/or the museum in general, that would be great. Another thing I want to point out before we get into today's program is there is a chat system on this free conference call platform for doing these online meetings, which is to say a text messaging section. If you need to get a hold of me and or our speaker during the presentation while all your microphones are turned off, use the chat feature, and you can find it by looking for the thing that's in the red circle there, the word chat, or a little like cartoon bubble thing, and then you can type in your comment or question. Depending on how important it is, we may cut in during the thing, or we'll save the questions and answers for the tail end after the presentation. So, with that said, I'm going to pass control here to Mike Burrell, who is our speaker for today. And let's see, how can we do that here? First, I'll turn his microphone back on. And then we'll switch presenter. And then Mike will be able to accept that. And do you see that there, Mike?
Yep. Let's see if it works. Are we there?
Yep. Oh, yes. Yes, you are.
Good. So am I the guy? Am I on now?
You're on. Take it away.
Okay. Well, first of all, I want to welcome anybody who's watching this. This is a new time for me doing this. I haven't done it before, but I'm going to talk just briefly about how I got involved with all this, and then it's not going to be about me after this. I got started dealing with the Pacific Coast Railway, and that's where I'm oriented, and that's where a lot of the people I dealt with were oriented, about the Pacific Coast Narrow Gauge Railway that ran from San Luis Obispo out to Port Hartford, and then it ran all the way down to Los Olivos. And it was a narrow gauge, and it hauled all kinds of stuff, which I won't get into a big detail on that. But that's how I got interested, and I was interested in about 1970 with a guy named Curtis Johnson, who along with Ken Westcott published a huge book on the Pacific Coast Railway that, for anybody who's interested in that railroad, you've got to get that book. We were stimulated back in 1970 by a different book that was done by a man named Gerald Best, the story of the Pacific Coast Company and the Pacific Coast Steamship Company. And that book had pictures of San Luis Obispo that I was arrogant enough to think that Cal Poly was what ran San Luis Obispo. And my landlady, whose husband worked as a fireman on the Pacific Coast Railway, said, "Oh, you guys from Cal Poly, you're all arrogant. You don't know what you're talking about." And she pulls this book out and starts opening up the pages. And there's pictures of Higuera Street, and there's pictures of the standards that are still there. And there's the station that is now gone, where the Pacific Coast Railway's main station was, and the trains and all this. And I was flabbergasted. So I was still a student at Cal Poly, but I got together, and unbeknownst to me, Curtis Johnson was doing research at the same time, and we both were members of the chamber orchestra up at Cal Poly. And finally we met and started researching this stuff. And I've been fascinated with it ever since. And we met John, and that's where I can pretty much start my talk now, is at that point, because the big emphasis of our whole group of people was to keep the memory of the Pacific Coast Railway alive. So this was the first slide that you see up here on the screen, is a thing that one of the first groups that John joined. It was the Central Coast Society of Model Engineers. And if you see in there, there's John Marchetti, and I blocked out a lot of the names because I wanted his obit in there with the color picture so you could see him. And then there's Sandy Merriam, who is also a member of the museum and doing things, and there were other people in there that were members of that group. Peter Thorpe, who was a big railroad guy, who's passed away, sadly, and that was John's first group, was that group of the Society of the Engineers. Now I'm going to go to the next slide here. And that kind of moved into this group, which was called Friends of the Pacific Coast Railway, which I didn't get into this group right away. And you can see John's names up at the top, circled. And these were a lot of the people, many of whom are gone now, who were members of this organization. And this organization was one which was very active and is still active in a way, but was kind of, when the new museum was set up and built, all of them kind of were absorbed together. So now it's one big group. But John was building models way before there was ever any museum. He had stuff in his garage. Other people, I think Andrew Merriam was doing this, and there were other people that were building models. But John became one of the big model guys. So this is a picture of the line, and this was Curtis Johnson's drawing that he did. He was an architect in addition to being a railroad buff. And you can see that the line starts up in the upper left-hand corner at a place called Port Hartford. And then it ran through a place called Miles, which is down by Highway 101 now, kind of where the old schoolhouse is there. And then goes up into San Luis Obispo. And that was really the first railroad that was built. And this was in the 1870s. And then the line was started to be extended. It would go from San Luis Obispo, it went down to all these little dots that you can see there by Tumina, where they got stuff that was used for paving roads, down to Verde, then there's a horseshoe curve there, down to Arroyo Grande, and then all the way down to Santa Maria and to Los Alamos, and then all the way to Los Olivos. And that's where the line ends. And to this day, you can find most of the areas where this track ran. And we have another guy who's a member who's really a detective who follows all the different maps and lines, named R.J. Hansen. And he can show every square inch of this line almost. And hopefully we're going to do some programs about that. So this is what the site of the main PC yard was. And you can see in the left-hand pictures, which are a little pixelated, but you still get the idea. This was the corner of Higuera and South Street, and that's where the station was. And there's a Sunshine Donuts there now, and that's where the station was. And it was there when I came down in 1967, but it was torn down before I was aware of any of this. This is Curtis Johnson's map on the right side of the station. And if you look at the top, you can see where South Street is labeled. And then if you look at the left, you can see where Higuera Street is labeled. And that long building where the word Higuera Street says is now the Pacific Coast Center, which has all kinds of little stores in there. But that was a rebuilt of the bean building. That was a bean building where beans were washed to be shipped out. And all behind that is where the railroad yard was. And that's all gone now. South Street is still pretty much the same. If you look at it, you can still see how things lie when you see old pictures of the trains that were on that road. Okay, this is John's model of a bridge that is no longer in existence. This crossed San Luis Obispo Creek down by where you head up to the Murray House and where you head up to the golf course, the area up there. This bridge was there, and it went down in 1983, and I have tons of slides, and other people have slides of when this bridge collapsed. But that's John's model, and you can look at the detail and look at how wonderful that whole scenery, the painting on these models is unbelievable. All of these guys, Merriam and all the other people that worked on these, John worked on these, they did an amazing job of painting these backdrops. I mean, it's really good. And there's John working. You can see the bridge to the right. There's John working again, and he's not working on the bridge right there. He's doing other stuff. He's working on cars and doing things. But I had to throw these pictures in here. A lot of these, thanks to Gary's staff on this, because he provided with more pictures of John actually working. Okay, this is John showing people things in the museum, and I'm not sure who that gentleman is, but there's John with his whole thing working in the museum. John measuring for a display that's going up in the museum. I keep losing the arrows here. Oh, there we go. Okay. Now there's a picture of the bridge. That's the one that collapsed that John built that beautiful model of. And that was taken in 1982 approximately. I took that picture. You can see the concrete bridge is on the right-hand side that goes there now. But you can sometimes, I'm not sure how many pilings and stuff are left. I know there's some pilings left from the old bridge that was done by the horse railway that's to the right of that. At low tide sometimes you can see that. I don't know if any of that concrete is still remaining though at San Luis Creek. But that bridge collapsed, and it was before a lot of the other stuff. The damage was done to the pier and everything else later on. Those storms in 82 and 83 were big. Okay, and this is John's model of Avila Beach. It's part of it, and I'm sure there were other people that helped build this. But if you look in the background up against the hill, that's John's model of the asphalt plant. There was an asphalt plant in Avila Beach. And I think it was called the San Luis Obispo Asphalt Plant, but I'm not sure about that. It could have been the Avila Valley one too. I'm not sure about the name. And here is a view of Avila Beach in the same general area. And the asphalt plant is not visible here, but it shows that same area that he was modeling with all the houses. And you'll see the asphalt plant coming up. Okay, so the asphalt plant is the upper left-hand corner of the picture with those two tanks. And that would be where the main road comes into Avila Beach. And they've had to truncate this for the model because they had to have all these different things and connections with their version of the Southern Pacific line so that all of these weave together and work together. But this is a good representation of what the houses looked like in Avila at that time. And these models are incredible. Now there's the asphalt plant up in the right corner, the model that John built. Up in the right corner of the picture you can see a dark tank, and you can see pictures of the building there where there was railroad cars out there that were filled with oil. And you can see what is now Front Street, and they, like I say, compressed a lot of these views. But you can see where the railroad bridge goes across San Luis Obispo Creek and then on to Port Hartford, where the old Port Inn was. It's now closed, sadly. This is a picture taken in 1935, 1937, right around that area at that time. And the train was still in operation, and you can see it running across the back. It went onto a long trestle before it hit the bridge. And you can see all the vintage cars that are parked along the wall, which I have more pictures of this taken in 1970 and then 1982 and 83, and it didn't look a lot different. It's been changed now ever since Union Oil had to do some repairs to Avila Beach because of their contamination of the soil. So it doesn't look quite like this now, but you can still pick it all out if you were to walk along and look. Okay, and there's John's model of the whole thing. And again, it's compressed. So you see a train on other tracks which doesn't exist, but the other track down below that goes across the bridge would be where those last pictures came from. And then Front Street and the houses and the businesses down below on the left. Great model, and look at those backdrops. Okay, there's the asphalt plant. So you can see, if you think back to John's model, you've got the oil tanks on the left, you've got the shed, the big shed, and the tracks that ran right by where you could load the oil. He was incredibly detailed with his models. This is on the line headed out towards Port Hartford, and that's the area that goes between Avila Beach and where the San Luis Obispo Creek Bridge was, all the way out to Port Hartford. And interestingly enough, there's still some of the horse railway that's buried up on top of one of the hills. Vincent Canet back in the day showed me. And he was up there with 80 years old hiking me around and saying, see that piling? If we dig here, we're going to find where the tunnel is for the horse railway. And that was back in 1970. But this model looks very much like the shoreline there by San Luis Beach out there. And by the way, if I say something wrong, please correct me at the end. Okay, now this was a warehouse that was built along that section of track between Avila Beach and Port Hartford. And in the right-hand corner, if you look, you can see a higher level of bushes. And I wish I had a pointer I could point to it, but it's at the far left, just below the crest of that little hill that you see there. That's a remnant of the old horse railway right there that's still in existence. The newer line, where the tracks are that you see in the middle, go off in the distance, and they skirt the area out there headed towards the Murray Hotel. But they're a lot lower than what those other things are. And that was where the old gravity railroad was for the horses, the horse railway. Okay, and there's John's model. And this thing's incredible. And I think that this was in his garage for a long time. And it may have been a smaller version. Maybe all the pieces were there, but it wasn't connected like this. And I'm not sure because I never saw his garage display. But there's this beautiful backdrop again, and then the beautiful model of the Murray Hotel with trains going out to what it was Port Hartford. And it goes around the curve along the bluffs to the right, and you can see where people walk in the museum to see this display. And this is all some of the work that John was involved in. Incredible model making. There's a view that's a real picture of a train that's a much lower aspect than what the last slide was. This is a lower aspect, but you can see a train of boxcars headed back towards where the Murray Hotel is on the right-hand side, with a locomotive pouring white smoke, getting ready to pull the train out. And see, at one time there on the pier, there was an extension that went way out, a lot further than it goes now. There was an oil extension. And that oil extension was used for shipping oil that came from Santa Maria, and it came from the Sisquoc and Palmer and those places, and then was shipped out of Port Hartford. Okay, now I got to find the arrows again. There's John's model of the pier, and you can see a boxcar on the left. And the pier was a lot wider, which had many different kind of like sidings of track that went out there. But the model boats are great that are there, and in the back is a rock which had houses on it at one time, and then back on the other side over here, which we don't see here, is Whaler Rock, but I think there's another model that shows that. Again, the detail on this pier and everything is just unbelievable. This is a steam pile driver, and there's Whaler's Rock there, and it's parked. This is what we used. A hammer came down on that tripod, the big tripod, that drove pilings into the silt of the bay. And this is how they replaced pilings on that pier. That picture shows up in other places here. Okay, so there's the steam pile driver working. And that's another view of the workmen fixing the rails and repairing the underpinnings of the track. And you can see the Murray Hotel in the background. It was called the Ocean Hotel at one time. And there's the big pile driver right there in the middle. This is a rather incredible picture. And this is where, if anybody has comments at the end that can tell me more about this, I would appreciate it. You can see boxcars with the pile driver in the kind of the middle of the picture at the bottom. But at the complete bottom of the picture are either beets, or it's rock, or it's something. I don't know what's in those cars. So if any of you know, that's something you can tell me. You can see that the train goes out to the pier, and there's a lot of fill in there now, where cars park and where they can launch boats, and there's a couple of restaurants that are there. And if you look at the end, that's the old building out there that was at the end of the wharf where that sailing ship is. And the Queen of the Pacific had some deadlights open and shipped water and sank and was beached in there. And it was later raised and continued service. And you can see Whaler Rock in the background with the other rock below that had houses on it. And the Murray Hotel's on the right. Okay, this is the current building, which was built, 1916, circa, around that time. The current warehouse. There are pictures of the old warehouse where it burned, and that was in 1915. And this is pretty much how the pier looks today. No tracks, of course. And there's John's model of a train leaving Avila Beach with the asphalt plant in the background, going across the bridge at San Luis Obispo Creek. These color model pictures are all things that are in the museum. I got permission from Brad LaRose, who let me in, to take pictures of these models. And there's that same trestle. So I'm going to back it up just a minute. See the long trestle that the engine is starting to cross? That's a shortened version of this real picture right here. That trestle is a long trestle that ran behind Avila Beach and ran all the way to the bridge that went across the creek. That's John teaching. And this is the warehouse building. And that's the current building. And these pictures, or the pictures I'm going to show you, came from Bob Brown and his brother. And you can see in the background, you can see Whaler Rock in the background, and then before that, on one of the sidings, you can see the pile driver and then the building. And when Brad was showing me around, he said, if you look carefully on those pilings, you can see barnacles that they put on the pilings. And again, this was one of the models I think he had originally built very soon and was in his garage. And again, you can correct me if I'm wrong about that. And it all is now in the museum. There's another close-up. Okay, and I keep losing the arrows. Come on, arrows. Where are you? There they are. There's a beautiful picture of the Murray Hotel. Now, this is another one where model railroaders are something else because of the detail they put in. I mean, you can see there that he's even got clothes on the line, which there are pictures of the Murray Hotel with clothes on the line, and John modeled the hotel to look like that. And he's got figures that are walking around on the deck. He's got a widow's walk at the top. And then onto the right-hand side, there's a turntable. And there are not too many pictures that people are aware of the turntable where they could turn engines around and turn cars around and do things that was at the Murray Hotel. But even the pilings down below the track that are with pilings stuck in and then wooden planks put behind to hold back the dirt. There's amazing detail. This is just incredible detail that these guys did. And John was the guy on this. That's a real picture of the turntable. For a while, that was a very rare picture because it was one of the few that showed that turntable. It turns out now it's showing up in other pictures. There's the Murray Hotel, or the Ocean Hotel. And to me, this doesn't look like a very attractive place the way it is right now. It looks like it's seen better days, but it could be just the quality of the way the picture, the colors came through because it's a black and white picture. Or the way the colors didn't come through. There's the same view pretty much of John's model with an engine in front, and you can really see the detail on the clothes hanging up and the railings and just the detail around the windows. I mean, it's just amazing.
Hey, Mike, can I interrupt for a second?
Sure.
A couple of things have come in from the chat, and since we're almost to the halfway mark, which you wanted to know, I figured I would share these. First, Bob Schremp mentioned that in that earlier diagram, like the third or fourth slide, there was a South Street Hygrera diagram, and he noted that about 10 years ago, the fence line at South Street was still curved, and that it wasn't rebuilt into, and then was rebuilt square with South Street later on, sometime after 10 years ago.
Yes, well, and I hope I'm answering the question when I say this. There are pictures that show trains leaving the yard headed up South Street, and it cut across a lot of the area which now would be street and would be fences and would be all that kind of thing. It was a gradual curve that went onto South Street and then went all the way up to where Pacific Home Improvement is, and where the Roundhouse for Southern Pacific was, where the tracks from the PC went behind the Roundhouse and then up to the station where they could transfer goods and transfer people. So yeah, his point is well taken. That's a very good point.
Okay, he also sent a couple of links to some photographs of the Mare Hotel, which I will include on the Parlor Car Chats page under this presentation so that anybody wants to go see those pictures. And lastly, a couple people actually have pointed out that while John did build the pier model, apparently it was Curtis Johnson who built the Mare Hotel model.
Really? Okay, well then Curtis is being very shy about telling me that. Because now see, Curtis in their book on the Pacific Coast Railway, the huge one that's the museum I think carries copies of that. He drew all the pictures. He drew all the pictures of all the cars and all the buildings and everything. So that would not surprise me that he built that. Good for him.
There you go.
Yeah, so are you good? Do you have more questions?
I am good, yes. Back to you.
Okay, so I'm going to point out here, if you take a look, this is an amazing picture. You've got the turntable, you've got the Mare Hotel, and you can tell it's in better shape because you see the difference in colors. And all the way out on the pier is the old building that burned in 1915 with a pitched roof. And then you can see the oil extension that goes out even further to give you just a view of that whole thing, how big that pier was at one time. And this is an amazing picture. And this is, let's see. Now, are you seeing a part of Diane being blocked out? Is my little window blocking out Diane? I gotta get. Well, I don't know that I can move it.
No, I'm seeing it all.
Okay, good. Okay, well, there's a raffle going on, and Diane's running it. Of course, John's helping, as he would, and that's at the museum, probably on a railroad days. And I don't know these people. I know John, but nobody's told me who the lady is that was in costume with him. So if anybody knows, please let me know. But I love the costumes. And there's another picture of John dressed with another lady who I don't know in costume. Okay, there's Diane talking to people, and it looks like it's Christmas time by the looks of the Christmas tree in the background. And it's got to be an open house or a day on Saturday when people are in there. That's my guess. How are we for time? Because I'm not sure what number slide I'm on right now.
You're right at the halfway mark. You're about 30 minutes in, Mike.
Okay, so I'm not sure what number slide this is, but I think we're going okay. There's Diane, and it must have been a day when the scouts were out there, which I'm not sure if that was on a railroad day or just a museum day when the scouts are there. But John and Diane are both helping them, and they're filling out forms and being shown around the museum. And we'll see another picture of John doing this. So there's John helping the scouts, showing them what's going on. And it's really cool that these pictures exist. There's John talking about things.
Hey, Mike, if I could interrupt, a couple of people have mentioned that these Scout-related photos are a program, actually, of the Railroad Museum where they do the Railroad Merit Badge with Scout groups.
Oh, okay, see?
Like once or twice a year.
That's great. Now, see, an old dog like me can still learn new tricks. This is good.
There you go.
Thank you. Yeah, so that's really cool that the museum does that. Okay, now this turned out to be a model by a different person, but this is not the model. This is a real picture of the Southern Pacific going across the trestle that's at Stenner Creek. And I thought John built this model, but I was corrected, so I put that correction in when I showed the picture of the model. There's another picture, same thing, but this time it's Amtrak. And this is the model, and this is Pat Tully that built this, and I didn't know that. So I had attributed this originally to John, but I was corrected, and it was Pat Tully who did this model, which is a beautiful model. It's unbelievable. I mean, the model makers, the crew of people that they all worked with, it was so good. And I build models, but not like this. Now, this is a picture that shows the Southern Pacific Roundhouse. And this is interesting because there's some things in this picture that are kind of cool. In the background, you can see a circular track, dirt. That was a racetrack. You can also see the roundhouse in front with the Southern Pacific trains going by. And behind that, you'll see in the next couple slides, the PC track, which came up South Street and crossed Broad Street, went behind that Southern Pacific Roundhouse all the way up to where the current station is. And that way they could take and put goods, they could transfer from one railroad to the other railroad, and people. That's an incredible picture of San Luis Obispo. Now this is this is a picture I got from my landlady who was correcting me about all this stuff about the Pacific Coast Railway. And this shows a train that just left South Street and was behind the Southern Pacific Roundhouse and turntable on its way to end up at the Southern Pacific Station. And it's very cool that you can see the tracks here where it ran, because the PC had tracks that went all the way up to where the Southern Pacific Station was. And this is Hadley. Hadley is south of Edna, or it's, well, southwest. And it was interesting because the narrow gauge was there long before the Southern Pacific tracks came. So the Southern Pacific had to give right-of-way to the Pacific Coast Railway. And the Pacific Coast Railway, which was not really always solvent, it was not the going concern that the Southern Pacific was, they required them to put in a manned tower at that crossing that could throw switches so that the PC always had the right-of-way no matter what time of day it was. And this is showing, you can see going from right to left behind the Hadley station, there's a set of tracks. Then there's the other curved tracks that go down to the right, and that's where the crossing was. And they had throw switches that they could derail a train if there was a right-of-way problem. And I think it's kind of funny that the huge Southern Pacific had to kowtow to the Pacific Coast Railway at this crossing. And there's the model. Now I'm going to say John built this, but now I'm not sure. Could have been any one of those guys. But look at the detail on that model. The Hadley Crossing. Okay, now this is some of the unfinished stuff, and we're getting, actually, I'm going through this faster than I thought I was. But this is a current situation at the museum now, where a lot of the models that Andrew Merriam had, and maybe some of the other model makers have, that are in boxes sitting around, that is going to be developed in the museum. And that is going to be the site of the Pacific, not the Pacific Coast one, the Southern Pacific Roundhouse is going to be where that circular indentation is. And you can see a picture of the roundhouse, which is the same one I showed earlier. You can see where the curve of the roundhouse is, and that's what's probably going to go in there. And I'm guessing, because I haven't seen a layout plan of that yet. This is a kind of a fuzzy picture that shows the Pacific Coast track, which is down in front, curving to go up to the Southern Pacific Station. And in the background, it's real dark, it's hard to see, On the left, the far left, is the brick building that became Warehouse Sound, and I don't know what businesses are in that big brick building right now. But that building dates way back to all these times, and you can kind of get an idea of where the tracks ran because of those buildings that are still standing in there. One of the houses is still there, and that brick building is still there. And let's see, I think I've got another picture here that's a little better. Okay, so there's a better one. And you can see here that you can see the brick building off on the left and where the Southern Pacific Station is. This was done after the Pacific Coast Railway tracks were pulled. But back in 1970, when I was out taking pictures, I found the ties where this spur that went up behind on the way to the Southern Pacific Station were still in the ground. The rails were gone, but the ties were still in the ground. And I think all that's been wiped out now. I don't think it's in existence. Okay, now there's one of the models, and that could be Andrew Merriam's. I'm not sure. But his collection, Brad LaRose was saying, is now sitting in boxes on that table, ready to be built. And you can see the brick building and how well that's been set up. And then down in front is the turntable for the Southern Pacific Roundhouse. Is the model of that is sitting in a box. And these are more things that are waiting to be installed on that whole back side. There you have the Southern Pacific Station. Here you have a warehouse, and it may be the warehouse that the museum's in. I'm not sure about that. The people out there can correct me about that model, if that's the case. And then there's all kinds of other things that are sitting in boxes waiting to be installed, which once that is all done, it's going to be just an amazing model of that whole area. It's going to be something else.
Bob Shrimp mentioned that is the warehouse building.
That is the warehouse building. Okay, well, I'm going to go back to it. So the building in the middle with the yellow siding is what the warehouse building looks like in total. Okay, good. I'm glad to know that. So that's where the museum is. Now I had to put this in. This is classic. Here's John. It's at Christmas time. He's got what you might find under a Christmas tree set up. This would be a very elaborate thing for a kid to find under his tree back in the day as a railroad exhibit or a thing for them to play with. But, I mean, this is, I think, what every kid at one time or another in their life dreams of getting for Christmas, is a big set like this. At least I know it was the case in the 50s and the 60s and 70s. If you got something like this, you were in heaven. And there's John. John and Diane on an excursion on Oahu on one of the trains. And I'm not sure, and this is, Diane may be watching this. Was this a narrow gauge? Or for anybody out there that knows, is this a narrow gauge train or is this a standard gauge? That's a question I'm asking the people who are watching.
Oh, hi, this is Diane. Yes, that is a narrow gauge.
Wow, okay, well, I'm going to turn back to it then. So do you know, Diane, if any of these cars and things that are out there came from the Pacific Coast?
I'm sorry, I don't know.
Right, okay, well, I know I was under the understanding that a couple of the engines came from the Pacific Coast Railway that were used in Hawaii somewhere, but I may be wrong about that.
That's possible. I don't know if they were used on this particular railway. Hawaii had many small railroads, and I don't know if they were used on this one. They might have been. Right.
Well, so that's a great picture. That must have been fun riding on that, too.
It's lovely. That car was beautifully restored, and you can still ride on it. They run it once a month. It's just, it's a little tourist railroad now, but it's a beautiful trip, and I highly recommend it to anybody that gets to Oahu.
Is it, do they have a steam locomotive, or is it a diesel?
It's a diesel that they use. They, as you know, steam locomotives are a little bit dangerous. So.
probably expensive to run too. Okay, this is on the train. I'm not sure if it's that same train, but it looks like it could be.
No. No, I think this was an Amtrak trip, and I'm sorry I don't remember where we were going, but...
no, it doesn't matter. I ride Amtrak too. If I have to go up somewhere on Thanksgiving, it's the train for me. Okay, and this is dressed in their finest.
Yes, this was Santa Maria Valley Railroad Fundraiser, and it was a 1920s theme.
Well, you guys look the part. And that's John. And Diane sent me this picture and said that at one time this car was in parts. And John, with his dedication, put it all together and then restored it. Rebuilt this, a 1956 Chevrolet Bel Air, which I would have killed for one of those things when I was a teenager. And he's even got a matching jacket with this thing. Car attendants, and thank you for telling me about this, at the Santa Margarita Ranch, and they're dressed in their finest. And this is what I thought was the best picture to characterize John, is this thing. And he certainly will not be forgotten. So this is thanks to all these people. So, questions?
Like it was worth it for what she did for this whole year. It was like for the pandemic.
Any questions for Mike? I've opened up all the audio input, so, and we've also covered all the chats as far as I know. So, any questions for Mike?
You know, I'm curious. I wasn't keeping track of the time. How long did it take me to go through that way?
Looks like just over 40 minutes.
So is that about right for one of these chats?
Perfect.
Yep.
Great.
Yeah,
well, that's good. Because see, really, there were 60 slides here, and I was worried that I'd be over 60 minutes. So I'm glad it worked out.
Okay. If there are no questions, let me thank Mike on behalf of. Oh, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to thank Mike for putting this all together. It was really, really interesting and a nice tribute to John. So thanks for putting it together.
Well, you're welcome, and I appreciate.
I also want to say thank you. I appreciate it so much, Mike. Thanks.
Well, listen, it was my pleasure to do this. I wasn't a hugely close friend, and I should say that, you see, not only was I friends with John, but I was friends with Diane. We taught together up at the Tascadero. So,
yeah, we go back many years.
Yeah, we do. Well, we don't want to talk about that too much because it's amazing when you look in the mirror now. It's a fog. A friggin' old guy looks back at me now, and that's just kind of how it is. And but see, but John and I were connected all the way through all those years, even though we weren't real close. We were friends. I mean, we spent a lot of time talking about all this stuff, and Curtis Johnson and all these guys, the same ones. So Pete Thorpe and Gordon Bennett and all these people. We had some times, and we still are busy with things. I mean, we've got more presentations than we do the railroad. So that's all in the works.
You asked about those cars that were in that picture at Avila Beach, that the open-top guns, and you were wondering what was in them?
Yes.
Those look just like the pictures of the cars that I've seen going up and down Bishop's Peak, bringing rock down off of the peak to take out there to build the breakwater and the fill.
Yes.
So, I mean, I can't guarantee it, but that looks just like all those cars, the rock cars that they filled.
Well, see, that was our one big. Well, no, our first big presentation we did with the Railroad Museum back about 3 or 4 years ago was about our work with the Bishop's Peak Spur, because John Madonna had that incredible picture of the track going right up the side of the mountain that nobody had ever seen before, and he found it on a postcard. And he opened up and took us up there, and you have to have permission to go up now. It's private property, so we can't just say, okay, the museum's going to give a tour to go up the Bishop's Peak and see all of that. There's rail up there too. I mean, it's hardly disturbed, and it's not in place. The rails are all just kind of all over the place, but you can see the track. It goes up the side. It's just to the east of what was this old house. You can see the track going right up the side of the mountain. And yeah, you're absolutely right. That very well could be rock. I was hesitant to say anything about that, but it looks like beets or rock or something like that. Absolutely.
I just can't think of why they would have beets out there at the pier.
Well, they ship beets out from the valley, I think, out to go out on ships.
Did they ship them out? They didn't take them down to Betaravia and turn them into sugar and then ship the sugar out?
That's a good question. Whether those beets were going or coming is another question. And I would say that probably, yeah, you're probably right. It probably was rock more than beets.
Yeah.
Any other questions for Mike? Okay, well, thank you all for joining. I put up here a last slide to remind us all that you can donate to the museum. If you want to know about Parlor Card Chats, there's the link. If you want to chat with me about future presentations, there's an email address. And in 2 weeks' time, on May 8th, our next Parlor Card Chat will be by Brad LaRose, and he will be talking about the history of the San Luis Obispo Railroad Museum, both the organization as well as the museum building itself, the freight house. So we will see you all again in a couple of weeks. Thanks for joining us. And once again, Mike Burrell, thank you very much for doing this presentation today.
Thanks to all of you for everything.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you. Thanks to all of you for watching.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, and it was fun doing this, to do this. It was great.
All righty. Goodbye, all.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.